WND Live, always reminding you to go to Rumble and subscribe, WND Newsroom, so you can follow the WorldNet Daily Live podcast right here. It's free, and the numbers are growing. It's fantastic. So all of you watching on Rumble, thank you so much. We can see your comments, so please be sure to comment during the show. And we'll throw some up on screens. Of course, big shout out to folks on YouTube and Facebook as well, and I believe on X as well, because let's bring our panel up. I think Elizabeth is has sent this feed to her account too, so that's good. So everybody who's following Elizabeth, say hi to all your followers there, Elizabeth.
Hi, followers. This is Elizabeth.
Very good. All right, producer Josh, founder Elizabeth, and of course Brian Allman is with us as well today. So that's fantastic to have you here, Brian. Thank you. The DNC has wrapped up last night, so we're going to go through some of the reactions around the horn on the conservative side about what that whole fiasco really meant last night. Some interesting takes, and then of course we are set to take RFK Jr. He's announced that he is going to go have a big an announcement to the country today. He has scheduled that for 2:30 Eastern, so about a half hour from now. And so if we are on the air and he busts live, we'll break over to him and take his announcement. The speculation, of course, is that he's going to drop out and possibly endorse Donald Trump. So obviously we won't know that until that happens. There's also word that there's a special guest later on today at the Trump rally in Arizona, and that just happens to be where RFK is as well. So
Quinky dink.
It's Beyonce, isn't it?
It's Beyonce.
It's Beyonce, of course, right? Yeah, she skipped out on the DNC, right, Brian? Very good. Okay, yeah. So this 10-week sprint to the election, folks, has begun. We are on the march. The both conventions are over. So let's dig in with some of the reaction here. We got this first clip here. Speaking about the RFK situation. Trump was asked about RFK. Let's watch this clip.
Can I ask you about RFK? Because just moments ago, his running mate said that they were considering endorsing you. Have you considered him for a role in the administration, and what role would that be?
Well, we haven't, but I would love that endorsement because I've always liked him.
Would you also consider putting him in the administration?
You're asking me a very unusual question. I haven't been asked that question yet. I like him a lot. I respect him a lot. I probably would if something like that would happen.
He'd consider it. I mean, we can probably consider everything, right, Elizabeth?
Well, yeah. I mean, that wasn't much of an answer. I mean, it was a good answer. I don't see how we would just make an announcement before the other announcement. But I'm very open to RFK being part of the Trump administration because he's the kind of liberal that we used to know about that didn't have malign designs. He's actually for the people. And so it's a sincerity. And I believe his take on the FDA and other regulatory agencies would be really a strong play for Trump.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think? Because the speculation is, RFK he's been a Democrat. He comes from a Democrat legacy family, and that that would draw away from Democrat voters. But people are saying, well, actually, he might be drawing away from Trump voters. So where do you think this dynamic holds, and is this the key to either party's success?
Well, I don't know which side he pulls from the most. I've seen analysis that say he pulls Democrat voters. I've seen analysis he says he pulls Republican voters. And I really don't know. But I think for the, as the kids say, the vibes, you can't beat a Kennedy and Trump alliance. Obviously, Robert Kennedy Jr. represents nostalgia for an America that was, the very America that Trump wants to bring us back to, make America great again. Back when our disagreements between the two parties were not over what is a woman or anything like that, but rather how much money should we spend on social welfare and things that are manageable discussions. I think the vibe again of seeing Trump and Kennedy together, if that is in fact what's going to happen, I think that's a powerful image. It's a reminder of what America was and what America could be, and it's going to really attract a lot of attention and a lot of folks who don't really pay attention to the issues. The Kamala Harris campaign, they're trying to run it entirely on vibes. They're not putting up policy positions. She's not explaining specifically what she's going to do. It's just, she's the cool brat wine mom. I don't know, whatever they're trying to say.
Definitely a wine mom.
So how do you counter that in the minds of voters who are susceptible to that? Well, Trump and Kennedy. That's
right.
That's going to leave an impression.
Right. And Josh, let's take a look at this clip real quick of an apparent Kennedy supporter who's hearing the news that if he endorses Trump. Let's get that guy's reaction.
That
I'm not hearing
Kennedy
any audio.
That was so interesting. Can we play that again? Just
oh, come on.
Yes.
Sound like the audio came up at the end, actually.
Does it come up?
I don't know.
We'll let the booth there.
Too far in.
Yeah,
I think
all
the
right.
kid
Well,
was excited.
The kid was excited, and he was going to vote for Trump. Apparently, right, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, this is like in America, we a lot of us that are older, we grew up on not too much older, grew up on Rocky movies and this idea that like people can team up to defeat evil. And that's a big theme for us in America. We love a narrative, and this is a great narrative. And this is on so many levels because we got to defeat the enemy. So we may have a clip here later, but like even classic liberals are like, hey, we don't know what this thing is that's gained power and calls itself a Democrat or left organization, but it's terrifying and we need to beat it at all costs. And that's where you have a pairing of, hey, RFK, he's not wacko, he's left, but he's not wacko, but we can team up Trump, RFK, and of course other people being mentioned. It's the dream team. It's kind of like bringing the forces together that would not otherwise have been aligned to defeat evil.
Yeah, I love the great analogy. It reminded me of when Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Savage, joined forces to take on whoever it was,
I don't remember that, but
come on.
you just
Everybody has a version of this.
There is a version. Yes, there is a version
yeah.
of this, and you're absolutely correct. And I think we should show that clip. That's a Brett Weinstein who, if we can cue up that clip from Brett Weinstein talking about what you just mentioned, Josh, I think that's really important. This was a fascinating take. And so if you are a Democrat out there or a Democrat leaning or a moderate or whatever, let's listen to what Brett Weinstein said just yesterday after his observations of watching the party over the years and the DNC.
I would argue that the way every patriotic American ought to look at this is there is a absolute top priority in this election, and it is to beat the unholy blue monster. And I say this as somebody who is a Democrat still, but I do not believe that party is salvageable, and I believe they have shown us everything they need to show us for us to know that A, they don't care about democracy. We've seen this going back as far as 2016 when they sabotaged Bernie Sanders and then argued in court, not that they hadn't sabotaged him, but that they had every right to rig their own primary. So they don't give a damn about democracy. We see the same thing in the ascendancy of Kamala Harris, which is obviously not the result of public enthusiasm. The public enthusiasm has followed from being told that this is the candidate of the party. We see it in the failure, both the use of the 25th Amendment as a threat against Biden to remove him from the race, and then the failure to invoke it to remove him from the office that he is no longer capable of managing. All of this suggests a party that is behaving wildly disloyally.
Yeah, Elizabeth. I mean, what great points he made there, right?
it's just hard to. It would be hard to put it better, other than what Brian and Josh said. Yeah, it embodies. He's just laying it all out for us that he, as a Democrat, is utterly repulsed by what the Democrat Party has become. But you know what I found particularly interesting is when he says it's unsalvageable. And so I'm wondering what he means by that. Does he go on further later, or maybe we don't even have that, to describe what happens to
I can
an
answer that for you.
unsalvageable party
Yeah.
that he belongs to?
So basically what he goes on to say that we're at the, and this is why I like it because I'm a doomer, we're at this existential moment for the democracy. So anything going forward with Kamala and, I was going to say this real quick. We're talking about dream teams and pairings. Think about RFK and Trump. And then on the other side, you still have an ailing Joe Biden and the America's wine mom. Not a great pair, but Weinstein is saying that large thing, that whatever it represents, right? Corporate interest, global interest, that thing getting power is the end of the country as we know it.
Yep, I think so. Brian, I want to go to you, Brian, but I'm going to see this real clip because you keep talking about the dream team here. And RFK has a long history of fighting against regulations. And so when you had, I don't know if you mentioned it on the air or before, Brian, but you mentioned him, maybe he'd be a natural fit for the FDA, but maybe it'd be better if he was the head of the CIA. But let's watch this clip and then we'll throw it to you, Brian.
So all of these companies are now, running the regulatory agencies, and they're all ultimately owned by three big companies, which all own each other. So it's this one giant company, and I know how to dismantle that. Mm-hmm. The perverse incentives and the built-in conflicts that need to be changed. And I a lot of people get in there and say they're going to drain the swamp, but they don't do it because they don't know how. But I know how.
Yeah, so he knows how. His organization, they've been suing these regulatory agencies for years and years and years. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because you look at Robert Kennedy Jr.'s policy positions, and most of them are left wing. Obviously, on a few, he's he's moved over to the right, or the right has moved to him, or somehow we've gotten onto the same page that we need to go after government regulation, and our food system's a mess, and big pharma is not our friend, and we need to stop foreign wars, and we agree on those things. And for now, that's enough to maybe build a movement. I've heard people say that this election is not necessarily one between candidates. It's not necessarily Trump versus Kamala Harris. It's a competition of systems. Which system do you want? And that's why you see people switching sides. You have RFK possibly endorsing Trump in a few minutes. You have Brett Weinstein saying he's still a Democrat, but it's going to be bad things if Kamala Harris wins. Even guys like Joe Rogan, who are generally, you just look at them on paper and they're on the left, but they're open to ideas on the right because the left has gone so far left, and their system is one of totalitarianism and globalism. And it's like I wrote on WorldNet Daily this week, the Democrats have become and embraced being a party of death and destruction. The climate extinction and abortion and vasectomies and transgenderism, whereas on the right you have people like Trump. He's on paper, his positions are not that different than Bill Clinton's were in 1992, but he represents something more American, something that we know in our hearts and deep inside represents what our country was and maybe could be again.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point because I think that is about two different systems. And I think when you think of an RFK voter, one of the reasons why they would either choose Trump or RFK, I know a few of these these old school hippie types, who ended up voting for Trump. It was the first Republican they've ever voted for in their life because of the overreach that the Biden and the left was doing with COVID and all of that stuff. And so I think the COVID issue is a major sticking point. The vaccination Operation Warp Speed. I think we have a clip here of RFK's running mate who talking about this very issue, that this might be the thing that they have to struggle with. So let's watch this a little bit.
Adam, I'll tell you, the hesitation we have right now in joining forces with Trump is that he has not apologized or publicly come out and said Operation Warp Speed was my fault. It was a failure and I let it happen. I'll never let it happen again.
The vaccinations, right.
I mean, all of it.
Right.
The lockdowns, the letting Fauci and Francis Collins run the show.
Yes.
The firing of the other folks at the NIH and individuals at the CDC that were censored.
So, Elizabeth, these are the militant folks that are in that world of vaccinations and all that stuff. I mean, this is their hardcore issue. And, we make a lot of excuses, I think, about there were a lot of unknowns during early 2020 and all of that. And it was really 2021 when Biden was in power that all of the mandates and the big overreach was happening. But how much of a sticking point do you think this is, and is it valid?
I think that there's some validity to it. Of course, it started and happened on his watch. But I would also say that the vice president, Pence, had much to do with managing that whole effort. I mean, that was very clear to me. And he also, I guess there's no excuse when the CEO of a company hires somebody who is incompetent or actually working against the good of the company or the shareholders or whatever. But Trump trusted Fauci. I trusted Fauci. Okay, I admit it. I trusted Fauci. I thought that this person, as he was being presented, as he presented himself, I didn't know how dark and evil and, that he was the highest paid person in the federal government and that he had incredible corruption behind him and all of the tentacles there. I didn't know that. Now, maybe Trump's advisors, his staff, his cabinet should have known and should have informed him. I don't know how much blame you can put at Donald Trump's, before him or at his feet, other than the fact that the buck stops here. So yeah, there is responsibility there, but I don't believe that it should be overblown. It was the first time we ever faced it. He did a lot of good things, and Biden and Harris were the ones, and Tim Walz and others for wanting to take that to an authoritarian, totalitarian, Marxist outcome. And yeah.
And we have this comment here that makes a really good point about how apologizing may not make a difference, especially now that we see that, Trump's under these legal woes. He had an attempted assassination. It's kind of like he's kind of paying. If there is fault, he's paying for it in this way. Brian, you had something.
I was just going to say, Trump, obviously, he has a big ego. He doesn't back down from positions. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't say, he got something wrong, and I don't expect him to. But really, if you're an undecided voter or you're a one-issue voter on the vaccination issue or the lockdowns, you look at the two campaigns, the two systems, the two candidates, which one is going to create an environment where your liberty can flourish and we can make progress, and which one's going to create an environment that makes it likely that we get locked down again, even worse this time. It's an obvious choice.
It's a great point. All right, well, we are about 11 minutes away or so from hopefully RFK. He had this. He posted on his social media this image here. Image number 1. Wednesday, Kennedy announced that he will be addressing the nation. That we know that 2 p.m. has switched to 2:30 p.m. So we're about 11 minutes away from that. So we will take that live as we can when he goes there. We also, you talked about the dream team, and I want to dive into this a little bit. WorldNet Daily, we tweeted out, we posted on X the image of what this possible dream team might be. You've got Vivek, you've got RFK, of course, JD Vance, Tucker, Tulsi, and wait, who is that? Is that I don't know.
Elon.
Oh, and Elon, of course, yeah.
Who is that? He doesn't have his spacesuit on. That's why you missed it.
Is that why? Yeah, no, I
That's
didn't
the
have my
really
glasses
trim
on. Is the
Elon.
problem. This is shaping up to be quite an interesting a team. Is it a technocracy? Are we going too far with the tech bros? Are we, what is this? Josh, I want to start with you, Josh. You're the doomer. I want to see how excited you are about
Doom
this.
us.
I mean, I would. It'd be great to have some smart people on board the Republican Party. I'm not going to say for once, but I'll say that they're new to our side of the Overton window. Like you have, Vivek, and then you have Elon, and if they apologize enough, we will welcome them in. Okay. And we'll take their good ideas because, they have excellent ideas. I think Vivek, frankly, is probably intimidating to anybody that does policy because he seems to have a really good handle on it. And if these guys are in and working as essentially executives in the government, how is that a loss for the American people? It would be fantastic. You know, instead of someone going like, we'll give you a tax cut. Cool.
Look,
I'll take it. But what else?
What's wrong with our educational system? Well, everything. But one of the major things is the fact that you have to be an official education major. You have to have graduated with a degree in education. You go to, Columbia and you get indoctrinated. This is what you do to destroy children's minds, your change agents and all that. So then you get a Nobel laureate, a scientist, a brilliant lawyer, a statesman, whatever, and they're not welcome to teach. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's very intimidating to teachers' unions and teachers, because teachers have basically the lowest scores of all of the professions in terms of their competency. And they don't want to be outshined by people that actually know how to do things, have spent their lives, their careers doing things. So let's just apply it here and now. Would Elon Musk be a good addition to, working, I'm assuming, on innovation or regulation? Anti-regulation is what he seemed to be most inclined to. Of course he would. He actually knows about these things and he has a passion for it. And so the guys in the federal government, the bureaucracy, would be terrified and shaking in their boots. And anything that would do that to them, I'm all for it.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
Going back to my column this week on WorldNet Daily about how the Democrats are the party of death, Republicans have an opportunity at least to become the party of life. It goes beyond just the abortion issue. It goes to families, and it goes to are you building things? Are you advancing humanity, or are you trying to take us back? And the left, I think, has completely abandoned any pretense of trying to advance humanity. They want to tear down statues. They want to destroy businesses. They want to destroy innovation. They want to destroy industry and just return us to caveman status. Whereas, and that's why you see this alliance growing on the new right with people like Elon Musk, who wants to, build
Brian, real quick. Sorry, we're looking at this this breaking news right here. Ahead of the speech, Robert F. Kennedy says in a Pennsylvania court filing that he will be endorsing Donald Trump. So I don't know how you get that into a filing and when that thing was filed or whatever. But that's interesting. That's interesting news here, as we're about 8 minutes away from hearing from RFK on this matter.
I mean, that's a line item on your Pennsylvania court filing. They say, "Oh, in BTW, who are you endorsing?"
Right. I don't know. Yeah. So maybe we'll have the team back there look into this a little bit further and try to figure out what that really is. But Brian, sorry to cut you off there. Just want to let the viewers know what was going on there. But if you want to,
thank you, Matt.
Yeah, it reminds me of the weeks leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine a couple of years ago, where all the intelligence and all the news reports were saying that Russia was going to invade. And I think a lot of us, me included, have become so immune to the news and propaganda and fake news that we thought, okay, it's not actually going to happen. And then it happened. So, this week we've been seeing rumors that RFK is going to endorse Trump. They've got the simultaneous, or the one event after another in the same place. And it's coming from all sides. So, I mean, cross your fingers. I'll believe it when I see it. But it looks like it's basically a done deal. And it goes into what I was saying, that all the people who support the idea of human life and human flourishing are coalescing in the Republican Party, and the people who hate humanity and want to destroy humanity and want to tear down statues and achievements and even rewrite our history to make us seem like we were all, awful, they're coalescing in the Democrat Party. It's party of death versus the party of life.
Yeah, and that's a great way to segment to some of the reaction that we were getting from Kamala's speech last night. We want to start with Tucker Carlson, who carried the speech live on his program, and he was commenting during it. And I think he also had Jason Whitlock with him from the Blaze, a sports and political commentator. So let's watch this clip.
Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy.
Can I just interject here for a second? This woman's really scary. She could easily get elected president. She's much more skillful than I have ever seen. She's a liar on the deepest level. The things she is saying right now are not just untrue; they're the opposite of the truth, which is the hallmark of evil. She's an extremist. She'll say anything. She's much more like Gavin Newsom than I ever realized. I could go through a whole litany of why what she's saying is not true. It wasn't an armed mob. There was not one person inside the Capitol with a firearm, period. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, and I don't want to sound like I'm whining or fact checking, which I hate, but what she's saying is the mirror image of the truth. She doesn't care. She's got no reference points in the truth, and she's an extremist. And she's a former prosecutor, and no former prosecutor should hold power, period. I've covered them my whole life. I've intensely disliked every single one of them. For good reason. I think they're scary, they're liars, and they're megalomaniacal. And they put people in prison for political reasons. I've seen it again and again and again, and she's one of them.
I mean, those are some strong words, Brian.
Amen.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not the target audience, but I think he gives her a little bit too much credit. I was one of those who didn't think Obama was that great of a public speaker. He was adequate at reading off the teleprompter. And she's not even on that level. But at this point, again, it doesn't matter. Because,
isn't he just talking about the fact that she is lying and she's enjoying it and she's embracing it and it clearly doesn't bother her? I think he said, she's doing a better job or basically than I would expect. Because she's very boring and she seems as if she's someone who is constantly talking down to her audience normally. And maybe she upped her game a little bit, but I think he was mostly speaking to the evil intention behind her words and the fact that obviously and very, very clearly she has no problem with...
And the point that she's a federal prosecutor is a great point because that I never really put the two together, but that is somebody who is they're there to spin a story so that they put away the person, and they have to talk to a group of 12 average people, and that's why she talks down to people all the time, because that, as a federal prosecutor, you're trained to talk to the grand jury or to talk to a jury that's in a trial and to say this is how it lays out, and there's no question about it. So she's trained in that sense, and yeah, you're right. I mean, it really feels like we're all jurors in her courtroom, and she's trying to convict Donald Trump on false charges once again. What do you think, Josh?
Matt, I watched this clip many times because this is a really good point between Elizabeth and Brian's commentary. My guess, and it's just a guess, is that I think Tucker was alarmed by her delivery of the information because, that's her biggest thing is on any given speech, you don't know if she's going to slur the words or read the prompter right or laugh or cackle. But in this case, she kind of like rose to the occasion to give an impassioned speech, delivering what looked like a performance that she completely believes what she's saying. And I think that my guess is, could be wrong, is that that's what Tucker was mostly worried about, because I don't remember myself seeing a speech like that that she's given before.
Right. I think that, yeah, all great points. We're about a minute away from checking in to see if RFK will address the nation at 2:30 like he has promised us. So we'll check in on that. Glenn Beck was on the air this morning with his reaction to Kamala, and he took a specific point that, Josh, I think you bring up in a way that she was very passionate about what she was trying to convey. And if you listen carefully to her words, let's listen to how Glenn Beck breaks it down.
When, I'd like to remind the moms of America that when she says we're never going back, she means that. So do you remember the time where you didn't have to worry about your kindergarten kids being taught that they could be a boy or a girl or a donkey or a goat? Well, we're never going back. Do you remember the time when you didn't have to worry about your kids having drag queen story hour? Well, we're never going back. You have to understand what she said and what she meant by that. That was language that you think means, well, we're not going to go back to corruption and we're not going to go back to divisiveness and all of that. Joe Biden is going to bring normalcy back. She's saying, I'm going to bring normalcy back. I'm going to bring all the good sunshine and flowers and lollipops. And she's saying we're never going back. You want to go back to when the world made sense.
The world made sense. I mean, such a great point, Brian. I mean, do you think that, I mean, it would make a great ad to show her words and then show what life is like and say, we're never going back to that.
Well, I think it sets up an actually, notwithstanding all the dirty tricks and the propaganda and the, rigged elections and everything else, it sets up a contest between worldviews, contest between systems, as we were talking about earlier. I just saw a tweet over here from Mystery Grove on Twitter. He says, I think RFK dropping out is going to help Trump because you've got the squishy types, the ones who don't really want to go all the way to Trump, but they don't like Kamala. Without RFK in the middle being the guy that they can say, well, I'm going to vote for that guy because he's better than both sides. It's going to force people to make a choice. And that's what a lot of Americans are going to have to do. Do you want to continue into this hellish dystopia that Glenn Beck was describing, that Kamala and Tim Walz support? Or do you want to go back to a time when we had a good economy and boys were boys and girls were girls and children were still innocent?
Yeah. Elizabeth, any thoughts on this going back business?
It's kind of that dog whistle thing where she's saying we're not going back, and she's on the surface saying we're not going back to Trump. But what she's really saying is we're not going back to, just like Brian said and everybody else, to the days when I grew up and when you all grew up and when my mother grew up and father, where, again, things were normal. And when you disagreed with somebody politically, it wasn't, I'm disagreeing about whether or not we should emasculate a 7-year-old boy. No, we're disagreeing over, like, should we have this much of a tax cut or that much of a tax cut? Or should children go to school, should they be out of school all of summer, or should they only get 2.5 months during the summer? It would just be shades of things. I mean, I know that there were differences. I'm not completely putting a rosy spin on Democrats and Republicans from 50 years ago, but still, she's saying that we will never go back. We are planting our flag on the hill. We're drawing our swords. We're pulling out the big armaments, and we're bringing in our troops, which are from south of the border, Africa and the Middle East and communist China. And we're going to vote into office a uniparty, and it's all over for y'all because it's going to be an authoritarian, tyrannical, Marxist nightmare. And you folks, be aware that we're not going back to days where there was freedom of speech and you had protection in the Constitution, in your civil rights, and you're all going to jail, is really what she's saying to people like us. It's over for you.
Yeah,
that's my kind of doomer.
Yeah.
Approach to it.
Yes.
It's good.
Yes.
I mean, maybe.
Good.
So we're 4 minutes past 2:30 when RFK said he was going to announce, and apparently we've heard that the delay is now 2:45 Eastern. So we'll keep tabs on. We're not going anywhere. We'll keep this. We'll
chase them.
Yeah, we'll chase him around the internet until he starts talking. But let's continue on here. Kamala, Brian, I think, been following, I know you've been following the border security issue and immigration and stuff. And Kamala says she understands the border security. So let's listen to her say what she said and get your take.
After decades in law enforcement, I know the importance of safety and security, especially at our border.
What say you?
Oh, maybe, I'm sure she knows all sorts of things that aren't so, like Ronald Reagan said. I don't know. When we're talking about the two systems, the two candidates, I think Kamala Harris's view of border security is to let in as many people as possible to, counterbalance and eventually replace, the American people, because that's exactly what she's been doing for 3.5 years. That's their vision. No human is illegal. California and Oregon, I just saw, are considering measures to allow illegal immigrants to get 0% down, zero financing mortgages. So basically, our tax dollars, or the tax dollars of those states, are going to subsidize people who shouldn't even be here in the first place. Up here in Idaho, we've been having our own issues, even though we're not even a border state. There's a lot of agriculture here, and some companies here are a little lax about making sure that their workers are here legally, and so they resist efforts to shut down that pipeline. And I mean, obviously, we know what's happening on the southern border. People have been down there with cameras. We've seen the numbers, millions and millions of people who should not be here, no matter why they're coming. It's they want to string this narrative that everybody coming here is just some poor refugee in search of a better life. Even if that were the case, that doesn't mean we have to allow them to come into our country. Just because there are poor homeless people living in your city does not mean you are morally required to let them come into your house and stay with you and your children. That's just foolish. You've got to care for your own family first, and we as a country have to care for our own people first. But I think that's one of the hallmarks of the leadership of the Democratic Party now. They don't see us as their people. They see themselves as separate. When they talk about our democracy, they're not referring to our democracy, our country, our system. They're referring to their system, and we're interlopers, we're intruders, we're those crazy people in the red hats who stormed the Capitol on January 6th and have to be dealt with before they can get to their utopia.
It's not just us. Yeah. They look at all of America as sort of a block, because even liberals still do know what the First Amendment is and do want equal protection under the law, that kind of a thing. They want all Americans to be sort of deluded by the massive influx of uneducated, non-English speaking voters. And these are easily manipulatable people. They will get stuck in the groove. They want to create their new base, and it's ignorant, illegal immigrants. I want you to just pause and think about the fact that these people, we wouldn't want to vote if they were Americans. They don't speak English. It's not that they can't read or write and they're just, uneducated. Like, 100 years ago, maybe somebody, they didn't want a writing requirement, be able to read and write in order to vote. I understand that. There's a reason for that. But if you can't even understand English, how can you vote? If you come in, if I went to Romania tomorrow, became a citizen, and was handed a ballot, how could I vote? They're literally I don't speak their language. I don't know their politics. I don't know their history. I don't know their laws, their constitution, and I would go and vote in Romania or Poland. That's what they're expecting of us. That's what they want, because that person is going to vote a name. Biden, Harris, that's those people are coming over the border. But the original question has she really protected? She understands people, their need to be protected, women, from violence. Is that really what we have been seeing in the last 3.5 years? The rapes, the robberies, the attacking police. The man who one of the men that attacked the police in New York City was just committed another crime. And I think they let him loose again. I'm not sure. If you guys know, let us know. How many women have been raped, children who have been raped, people who have been killed, and that tens of thousands on the way from Mexico or across the border who have been raped. She cannot possibly say that she understands what it feels like to be a victim of violence and that she wants to protect anybody.
Yeah. And I know, Brian, you had mentioned that Idaho is not a border state, but just from being up here in North, we actually are a border state. I'm 90 minutes from Canada. Never forget the North.
Good point.
Thinking of the southern border, but yes.
But the southern border is the big issue, of course, and nothing detracts from that. This is a shot here of inside the stadium as they're preparing for the Trump rally today. This is the arena are they in Glendale or Phoenix? I forget exactly where they're at. Maybe that's both. I know Glendale and Phoenix are near each other, but nonetheless, this is and then outside they were, as is always the case with a Trump rally, they're always lining up, getting ready to come inside. And so the Trump campaign did announce that there will be a special guest today in Arizona. We're about 5 minutes away from the third timestamp for RFK's announcement. And of course, it was leaked that he is going to endorse the campaign in this Pennsylvania court filing, which again was odd. So one of the clips we did have was RFK's running mate talking about the fact that they may, I don't know exactly when this was filmed. Do we know when this was recorded, Josh, of her talking about they may or may not? Yeah.
The Tom Bilyeu podcast. I think it was just earlier this week.
Yeah. Let's watch this clip about the fate of the RFK.
My gut tells me right now is that we just have to keep being honest. I got to just keep being honest. I got to keep focusing on what matters the most outside of party lines. I need to focus on a vision that goes beyond November. And if that means that we stay in, and there's benefits to staying in. If we get over 5% of the vote, we actually establish ourselves as a party. 71% of Americans want a strong third party with a real shot at winning. There's even public funds available if we get over 5% of the vote. So we could get, I think.
Yeah, Josh, what's your take?
So I want to go back to this thing. I think it's a really big deal. It's only barely kind of hitting the headlines. And that is the idea that multiple states in California and Oregon, and maybe more to come, are offering these home loans to illegals for potentially zero down. I saw that a headline for Oregon.
The Hacienda program.
That is so crazy. So as an example, millennials and Zoomers will tell you right now that this is like the least affordable time to be alive. They have a lot of them joke, but it's a kind of a dark joke that they're never going to own a house. And my thought on this was that like the Democrats have fully moved into this place of sacrifice. They want all of us to sacrifice our babies, our kids, and if they lose their gender, our hard work through our money and through taxation, and now homes, and really our future. This is their whole thing. They want us to sacrifice, but not for the good of the nation, but for them, really, for their power. And I think like we can't touch on this like 0% loans for illegals thing. I don't think we can really like be loud enough about that. It's fundamentally like the most insulting thing I've ever heard from the left, but I feel like it's not really even getting that much attention.
That's a good point, Josh.
Yeah.
And they don't even have to make payments, by the way. The program is something like this. They get in for nothing. They live in there as long as they want. They don't make payments. They just have to promise that out of the proceeds, when they sell this house that they never really bought themselves, that all those payments, and I don't know if there's a down payment, will be paid back out of the proceeds from the sale. Would you like that deal, guys?
Wow. I'd love that. That's it. Why can't
other than that it would
citizens get that
bankrupt
deal?
our country. She's already, I don't even know if that is related at all to this $25,000 down payment program.
Oh, here we have RFK, so let's go live to this. We'll get it. Our team was working on that. Looks like RFK was taking the podium there to deliver his announcement. So our team will refresh the feed and we'll take it live as soon as we can.
As a Democrat, the party of my father, my uncle, the party which I pledged my own allegiance to long before I was old enough to vote. I attended my first Democratic convention at the age of 6 in 1960. And back then, the Democrats were the champions of the Constitution, of civil rights. The Democrats stood against authoritarianism, against censorship, against colonialism, imperialism, and unjust wars. We were the party of labor, of the working class. The Democrats were the party of government transparency. and the champion of the environment. Our party was the bulwark against big money interests and corporate power. True to its name, it was the party of democracy. As you know, I left that party in October because it had departed so dramatically from the core values that I grew up with. It had become the party of war, censorship, corruption, big pharma, big tech, big ag, and big money. When it abandoned democracy by canceling the primary to conceal the cognitive decline of the sitting president, I left the party to run as an independent. The mainstream of American politics and journalism derided my decision. Conventional wisdom said that it would be impossible even to get on the ballot as an independent because each state poses an insurmountable tangle of arbitrary rules for collecting signatures. I would need over 1 million signatures, something no presidential candidate in history had ever achieved. And then I'd need a team of attorneys and millions of dollars to handle all the legal challenges from the DNC. The naysayers told us that we were climbing a glass version of Mount Impossible. So the first thing I want to tell you is that we proved them wrong. We did it because beneath the radar of mainstream media organs, we inspired a massive independent political movement. More than 100,000 volunteers sprang into action, hopeful that they could reverse our nation's decline. Many worked 10-hour days, sometimes in blizzards and blazing heat. They sacrificed family time, personal commitments, and sleep month after month, energized by a shared vision of a nation healed of its divisions. They set up tables at churches and farmers markets. They canvassed door to door. In Utah and in New Hampshire, volunteers collected signatures in snowstorms, convincing each supporter to stop in the frigid cold, to take off their gloves, and to sign legibly. During a heat wave in Nevada, I met a tall, athletic volunteer who cheerfully told me that he had lost 25 pounds collecting signatures in 117-degree heat. To finance this effort, young Americans donated their lunch money, and senior citizens gave up part of their Social Security checks. Our 50-state organization collected those millions of signatures and more. No presidential campaign in American political history has ever done that. And so I want to thank all of those dedicated volunteers and congratulate the campaign staff who coordinated this enormous logistical feat. Your accomplishments were regarded as impossible. You carried me up that glass mountain. You pulled off a miracle. You achieved what all the pundits said could never be done. You have my deepest gratitude, and I'm never going to forget that, not just for what you did for my campaign, but for the sacrifices you made because you love our country. You showed everyone that democracy is still possible here. It continues to survive in the press and in the idealistic human energies that still thrive beneath the canvas of neglect and of official and institutional corruption. Today, I'm here to tell you that I will not allow your efforts to go to waste. I'm here to tell you that I will leverage your tremendous accomplishments to serve the ideals that we share, the ideals of peace, of prosperity, of freedom, of health, all the ideals that motivated my campaign. I'm here today to describe the path forward that you have opened with your commitment and with your hard labors. Now, in an honest system, I believe that I would have won the election. In a system that my father and my uncles thrived in, a system with open debates, with fair primaries, with regularly scheduled debates, with fair primaries, and with a truly independent media untainted by government propaganda and censorship. In a system of nonpartisan courts and election boards, everything would be different. After all, the polls consistently showed me beating each of the other candidates, both in favorability and also in head-to-head matchups. But I'm sorry to say that while democracy may still be alive at the grassroots, it has become little more than a slogan for our political institutions, for our media, and for our government, and most sadly at all for me, the Democratic Party. In the name of saving democracy, the Democratic Party set itself to dismantling it, lacking confidence in its candidate, that its candidate could win in a fair election at the voting booth. The DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself. Each time that our volunteers turned in those towering boxes of signatures needed to get on the ballot, the DNC dragged us into court, state after state, attempting to erase their work and to subvert the will of the voters who had signed those petitions. It deployed DNC aligned judges to throw me and other candidates off the ballot and to throw President Trump in jail. It ran a sham primary that was rigged to prevent any serious challenge to President Biden. Then, when a predictably bungled debate performance precipitated the palace coup against President Biden, the same shadowy DNC operatives appointed his successor, also without an election. They installed a candidate who was so unpopular with voters that she dropped out in 2020 without winning a single delegate. My uncle and my father both relished debate. They prided themselves on their capacity to go toe to toe with any opponent in the battle over ideas. They would be astonished to learn of a Democratic Party presidential nominee who, like Vice President Harris, has not appeared in a single interview or an unscripted encounter with voters for 35 days. This is profoundly undemocratic. How are people to choose when they don't know whom they are choosing? And how can this look to the rest of the world? My father and my uncle were always conscious of America's image abroad because of our nation's role as the template for democracy, the role model for democratic processes, and the leader of the free world. Instead of showing us her substance and character, the DNC and its media organs engineered a surge of popularity for Vice President Harris based upon, well, nothing. No policies, no interviews, no debates, only smoke and mirrors and balloons in a highly produced Chicago circus. There in Chicago, a string of Democratic speakers mentioned Donald Trump 147 times just on the first day. Oh, who needs a policy when you have Trump to hate? In contrast, at the RNC convention, President Biden was mentioned only twice in 4 days. I do interviews every day. Many of you have interviewed me. Anybody who asks gets to interview me. Some days I do as many as 10. President Trump, who actually was nominated and won an election, also does interviews daily. How did the Democratic Party choose a candidate that has never done an interview or debate during the entire election cycle? We know the answers. They did it by weaponizing the government agencies. They did it by abandoning democracy. They did it by suing the opposition and by disenfranchising American voters. What most alarms me isn't how the Democratic Party conducts its internal affairs or runs its candidates. What alarms me is the resort to censorship and media control and the weaponization of the federal agencies. When a US president colludes with or outright coerces media companies to censor political speech, it's an attack on our most sacred right of free expression. And that's the very right upon which all of our other constitutional rights rest. President Biden mocked Vladimir Putin's 88% landslide in the Russian elections, observing that Putin and his party controlled the Russian press and that Putin prevented serious opponents from appearing on the ballot. But here in America, the DNC also prevented opponents from appearing on the ballot. And our television networks exposed themselves as Democratic Party organs over the course of more than a year in a campaign where my poll numbers reached at times in the high 20s. The DNC allied mainstream media networks maintain a near perfect embargo on interviews with me. During his 10-month presidential campaign in 1992, Ross Perot gave 34 interviews on mainstream networks. In contrast, during the 16 months since I declared, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN combined gave only 2 live interviews from me. Those networks instead ran a continuous deluge of hit pieces with inaccurate, often vile, pejoratives and defamatory smears. Some of those same networks and colluded with the DNC to keep me off the debate stage. Representatives of those networks are in this room right now, and I'll just take a moment to ask you to consider the many ways that your institutions have abdicated this really sacred responsibility, the duty of a free press to safeguard democracy and to challenge always the party in power. Instead of maintaining that posture of fear, skepticism toward authority, your institutions have made themselves government mouthpieces and stenographers for the organs of power. You didn't alone cause the devolution of American democracy, but you could have prevented it. The Democratic Party's censorship of social media was even more of a naked exercise of executive power. This week, a federal judge, Terry Doty, upheld my injunction against President Biden, calling the White House's censorship project, quote, the most egregious violation of the First Amendment in the history of the United States of America. Doty's previous 155-page decision details how just 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution, President Biden and his White House opened up a portal and then invited the CIA, the FBI, CISA, which is a censorship agency, it's the center of the censorship industrial complex, DHS, the IRS, and other agencies to censor me and other political dissidents on social media. Even today, users who try to post my campaign videos to Facebook or YouTube get messages that this content violates community standards. 2 days after Judge Doty rendered his decision this week, Facebook was still attaching warning labels to an online petition calling on ABC to include me in the upcoming debate. They said that violates community standards, their community standards. The mainstream media was once the guardian of the First Amendment and democratic principles, and has joined this systemic attack on democracy. It also, the media justifies their censorship on the grounds of combating misinformation, but governments and oppressors don't censor lies. They don't fear lies. They fear the truth, and that's what they censor. And I don't want any of this to sound like a personal complaint, because it's not. For me, it's all part of a journey, and it's a journey that I signed up with. But I need to make these observations because I think they're critical for us doing the thing that we need to do as citizens in a democracy to assess where we are in this country and what our democracy still looks like, and the assumptions about US leadership around the globe. And are we living up, are we really still a role model for democracy in this country? Or have we made it, a kind of a joke. Here's the good news. While mainstream outlets denied me a critical platform, they didn't shut down my ideas, which have especially flourished among young voters and independent voters, thanks to the alternative media. Many months ago, I promised the American people that I would withdraw from the race if I became a spoiler. A spoiler is someone who will alter the outcome of the election but has no chance of winning. In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory in the face of this relentless systematic censorship and media control. So I cannot in good conscience ask my staff and volunteers to keep working their long hours or ask my donors to keep giving when I cannot honestly tell them that I have a real path to the White House. Furthermore, our polling consistently showed that by staying on the ballot in the battleground states, I would likely hand the election over to the Democrats with whom I disagree on the most existential issues: censorship, war, and chronic disease. Oh, I want everyone to know that I am not terminating my campaign. I am simply suspending it and not ending it. My name my name will remain on the ballot in most states. If you live in a blue state, you can vote for me without harming or helping President Trump or Vice President Harris. In red states, the same will apply. I encourage you to vote for me. And if enough of you do vote for me, and neither of the major party candidates win 270 votes, which is quite possible. In fact, today our polling shows them tying at 269 to 269. And I could conceivably still end up in the White House in a contingent election. But in about 10 battleground states where my presence would be a spoiler, I'm going to remove my name. And I've already started that process and urge voters not to vote for me. It's with a sense of victory and not defeat that I'm suspending my campaign activities. Not only did we do the impossible by collecting 1 million signatures, we changed the national political conversation forever. Chronic disease, free speech, government corruption, breaking our addiction to war have moved to the center of politics. I can say to all who have worked so hard the last year and a half, thank you for a job well done. 3 great causes drove me to enter this race in the first place, primarily. And these are the principal causes that persuaded me to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent. And now to throw my support to President Trump. The causes were free speech, a war in Ukraine, and the war on our children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification, like they do on every war, that this one is a noble effort to stop a supervillain, Vladimir Putin, invading the Ukraine and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle initiated by the ambitions of the US neocons or American global hegemony. I'm not excusing Putin for invading Ukraine. He had other options. But the war is Russia's predictable response to the reckless neocon project of extending NATO to encircle Russia, a hostile act. The credulous media rarely explain to Americans that we unilaterally walked away from 2 intermediate nuclear weapons treaties with Russia and then put nuclear-ready Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland. This is a hostile act. And that the Biden White House repeatedly spurned Russia's offer to settle this war peacefully. The Ukraine war began in 2014 when U.S. agencies overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and installed a hand-picked pro-Western government that launched a deadly civil war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. In 2019, America walked away from a peace treaty, the Minsk Agreement, that had been negotiated between Russia and Ukraine by European nations. And then in April of 2022, we wanted the war. In April of 2022, President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine to force President Zelensky to tear up a peace agreement that he and the Russians had already signed, and the Russians were withdrawing troops from Kiev and Donbass and Lugansk. And that peace agreement would have brought peace to the region and would have allowed Donbass and Lugansk to remain part of Ukraine. President Biden stated that month that his objective in the war was regime change in Russia. His Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, simultaneously explained that America's purpose in the war was to exhaust the Russian army, to degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. These objectives, of course, have nothing to do with what they were telling Americans about protecting Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine is a victim in this war, and it's a victim of the West. Since then, of Russia and both Russia and the West. Since then, since tearing up that agreement, forcing Zelensky to tear up the agreement, we've squandered the flower of Ukrainian youth, as many as 600,000 Ukrainian kids and over 100,000 Russian kids, all of whom we should be mourning, have died, and the Ukraine's infrastructure is destroyed. The war has been a disaster for our country as well. We squandered nearly $200 billion already, and these are badly needed dollars in our communities, suffering communities all over our country. The Nord Stream pipeline sabotage and the sanctions have destroyed Europe's industrial base, which formed the bulwark of US national security. A strong Germany with a strong industry is a much, much stronger deterrent to Russia, and a Germany that is deindustrialized and turned into just an extension of a US military base. We've pushed Russia into a disastrous alliance with China and Iran. We're closer to the brink of nuclear exchange than at any time since 1962. And the neocons in the White House don't seem to care at all. Our moral authority and our economy are in shambles. And the war gave rise to the emergence of BRICS, which now threatens to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. This is a first-class calamity for our country. Judging by her bellicose, belligerent speech last night in Chicago, we can assume that President Harris will be an enthusiastic advocate for this and other neocon military adventures. And President Trump says that he will reopen negotiations with President Putin and end the war overnight as soon as he becomes president. This alone would justify my support for his campaign. Last summer, it looked like no candidate was willing to negotiate a quick end to the Ukraine war, to tackle chronic disease epidemic, to protect free speech, our constitutional freedoms, to clean corporate influence out of our government, or to defy the neocons and their agenda of endless military adventurism. But now one of the two candidates has adopted these issues as his own, to the point where he has asked to enlist me in his administration. I'm speaking, of course, of Donald Trump. Less than 2 hours after President Trump narrowly escaped assassination, Callie Means called me on my cell phone. I was then in Las Vegas. Callie is arguably the leading advocate for food safety, for soil regeneration, and for ending the chronic disease epidemic that is destroying America's health and ruining our economy. Callie has exposed the insidious corruption at the FDA, the NIH, the HHS, and the USDA that has caused the epidemic. Callie had been working on and off for my campaign advising me on those subjects since the beginning. And those subjects have been my primary focus for the last 20 years. I was delighted when Kelly told me that day that he had also been advising President Trump. He told me President Trump was anxious to talk to me about chronic disease and other subjects and to explore avenues of cooperation. He asked if I would take a call from the president. President Trump telephoned me a few minutes later, and I met with him the following day. A few weeks later, I met again with President Trump and his family members and closest advisors in Florida. In a series of long, intense discussions, I was surprised to discover that we are aligned on many key issues. In those meetings, he suggested that we join forces as a unity party. We talked about Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. That arrangement would allow us to disagree publicly and privately and fiercely, if need be, on issues over which we differ, while working together on the existential issues upon which we are in concordance. I was a ferocious critic of many of the policies during his first administration, and there are still issues and approaches upon which we continue to have very serious differences. We are aligned with each other on other key issues like ending the forever wars, ending the childhood disease epidemics, securing the border, protecting freedom of speech, unraveling the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, getting the US intelligence agencies out of the business of propagandizing and censoring and surveilling Americans and interfering with our elections. Following my first discussion with President Trump, I tried unsuccessfully to open similar discussions with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris declined to meet or even to speak with me. Suspending my candidacy is a heart-rending decision for me, but I'm convinced that it's the best hope for ending the Ukraine war and ending the chronic disease epidemic that is eroding our nation's vitality from the inside, and for finally protecting free speech. I feel a moral obligation to use this opportunity to save millions of American children, above all things. In case some of you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general, I would urge you to view Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Kelly Means and his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who is the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School. This is an issue that affects all of us far more directly and urgently than any culture war issue and all the other issues that we obsess on and that are tearing apart our country. This is the most important issue. Therefore, it has the potential to bring us together. So let me share a little bit about why I believe it's so urgent. Today, 2/3, we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of any nation in the world. We're about 79th in health outcomes behind Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Mongolia and other countries. Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. And during the COVID epidemic, we had the highest body count of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population. And CDC says that's because we are the sickest people on earth. We have the highest chronic disease rate on earth. And the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So these were people who had immune system collapse, who had mitochondrial dysfunction. And no other country has anything like this. 2/3 of American adults and children suffer from chronic health issues. 50 years ago, that number was less than 1%. So we've gone from 1% to 66%. In America, 74% of Americans are now overweight or obese, and 50% of our children. 120 years ago, when somebody was obese, they were sent to the circus. There were case reports done about them. Obesity was almost unknown. In Japan, the childhood obesity rate is 3% compared to 50% here. Half of Americans have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. When my uncle was president, I was a boy, juvenile diabetes was effectively non-existent. A typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his entire career, a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And the mitochondrial disorder that caused diabetes also causing Alzheimer's, which is now classified as diabetes. And it's costing this country more than our military budget every year. There's been an explosion of neurological illnesses that I never saw as a kid: ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, Asperger's, autism. In the year 2000, the autism rate was 1 in 1,500. Now, autism rates in kids are 1 in 36, according to CDC nationally. Nobody's talking about this. 1 in every 22 kids in California has autism. And this is a crisis that 77% of our kids are too disabled to serve in the United States military. What is happening to our country? And why isn't this in the headlines every single day? There's nobody else in the world that is experiencing this. This is only happening in America. About 18%. And by the way, there has been no change in diagnosis, which the industry sometimes like to say. There has been no change in screening. This is a change in incidence. In my generation, 70-year-old men, the autism rates are about 1 in 10,000. In my kids' generation, 1 in 34. I'll repeat, in California, 1 in 22. Why are we letting this happen? Why are we allowing this to happen to our children? These are the most precious assets that we have in this country. How can we let this happen to them? About 18% of American teens now have fatty liver disease. That's like 1 out of every 5. That disease, when I was a kid, only affected late-stage alcoholics who were elderly. Cancer rates are skyrocketing in the young and the old. Young adult cancers are up 79%. 1 in 4 American women is on antidepressant medication. 40% of teens have a mental health diagnosis. And 15% of high schoolers are on Adderall, and 500,000 children on SSRIs. So what's causing this suffering? I'll name 2 culprits. First, and the worst, is ultra-processed food. About 70% of American children's diet is ultra-processed. That means industrial manufactured in a factory. These foods consist primarily of processed sugar, ultra-processed grains, and seed oils. Laboratory scientists many of them formerly worked for the cigarette industry, which purchased all the big food companies in the 1970s and 80s, deployed thousands of scientists to figure out new chemicals to make the food more addictive. And these ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago. Humans aren't biologically adapted to eat them. Hundreds of these chemicals are now banned in Europe, but ubiquitous in American processed foods. The second culprit is toxic chemicals in our food, our medicine, and our environment. Pesticides, food additives, pharmaceutical drugs, and toxic waste permeate every cell of our bodies. The assault on our children's cells and hormones is unrelenting. To name just one problem, many of these chemicals increase estrogen because young children are ingesting so many of these hormone disruptors. America's puberty rate is now occurring at age 10 to 13, which is 6 years earlier than girls were reaching puberty in 1900. Our country has the earliest puberty rates of any continent on the earth. And no, this isn't because of better nutrition. This is not normal. Breast cancer is also estrogen driven, and it now strikes 1 in 8 women. We are mass poisoning all of our children and our adults. Considering the grievous human cost of this tragic epidemic of chronic disease, it seems almost crass to mention the damage it does to our economy. But I'll say it is crippling the nation's finances. When my uncle was president, our country spent $0 on chronic disease. Today, government healthcare spending is almost all for chronic disease. And it's double the military budget. And it is the fastest growing budget item in the federal budget. And chronic disease costs more to the economy as a whole, costs at least $4 trillion, 5 times our military budget. And that's a 20% drag on everything we do and everything we aspire to. Poor and minority communities suffer disproportionately. People who worry about DEI or about bigotry of any kind, this dwarfs anything. We are poisoning the poor. We are systematically poisoning minorities across this country. Industry lobbyists have made sure that most of the food stamp lunch program, about 70% of food stamps and 70 or 77% of school lunches are processed foods. There's no vegetables. There's nothing that you would want to eat. We are just poisoning the poor citizens, and that's why they have the highest chronic disease burden of any demographic in our country, and the highest in the world. The same food industry lobbied to make sure that nearly all agricultural subsidies go to commodity crops that are the feedstock of processed food industry. These policies are destroying small farms, and they're destroying our soils. We give about, I think, 8 times as much in subsidies to tobacco than we do to fruits and vegetables. It makes no sense if we want a healthy country. The good news is that we can change all this. We can change it very, very quickly. America can get healthy again. To do that, we need to do 3 things. First, we need to root out the corruption in our health agencies. Second, we need to change incentives in our healthcare system. And third, we need to inspire Americans to get healthy again. 80% of NIH grants go to people who have conflicts of interest. These are the people, virtually everybody who sits, Joe Biden just appointed a new panel to NIH to decide the food recommendations. And they're all people who are from the industry. They're all people who are from the processed food companies. They're deciding what Americans, here is healthy. And the recommendations on the food pyramid and what goes to our school lunch programs, what go to the program, the Swiss program, the food stamp programs. They're all corrupted and conflicted individuals. These agencies, the FDA, USDA, and CDC, all of them are controlled by giant for-profit corporations. 75% of the FDA's funding doesn't come from taxpayer, it comes from pharma. And pharma executives and consultants and lobbyists cycle in and out of these agencies with President Trump's backing. I'm going to change that. We're going to staff these agencies with honest scientists and doctors who are free from industry funding. We're going to make sure the decisions of consumers, doctors, and patients are informed by unbiased science. A sick child is the best thing for the pharmaceutical industry. When American children or adults get sick with a chronic condition, they're put on medication for their entire life. Imagine what will happen when Medicare starts paying for Ozempic, which costs $1,500 a month, and it's being recommended for children as young as 6, all for a condition, obesity, that is completely preventable and barely even existed 100 years ago. And 74% of Americans are obese. The cost, if all of them took their Ozempic prescription, is $3 trillion a year. This is a drug that is made by Novo Nordisk, the biggest company in Europe. It's a Danish company, and the Danish government does not recommend it. It recommends change in diet to treat obesity and exercise. And in our country, the recommendation now is for Ozempic to children at age 6. Novo Nordisk, the biggest company in Europe, and virtually its entire value is based upon its projections of what it's going to sell, of the Ozempic it's going to sell to America. And we have the food lobbyists have a bill in front of Congress today that is backed by the White House, backed by Vice President Harris and President Biden, to allow this to happen. This $3 trillion cost that is going to bankrupt our country. For a fraction of that amount, we could buy organic food for every American family, 3 meals a day, and eliminate diabetes altogether. We're going to bring healthy food back to school lunches. We're going to stop subsidizing the worst foods with our agricultural subsidies. We're going to get toxic chemicals out of our food. We're going to reform the entire food system. And for that, we need new leadership in Washington. Because unfortunately, both the Democrats and the Republican parties are in cahoots with the big food producers, big pharma and big ag, which are among the DNC's major donors. Vice President Harris has expressed no interest in addressing this issue. 4 more years of Democratic rule will complete the consolidation of corporate and neocon power, and our children will be the ones who suffer most. I got involved with chronic disease 20 years ago, not because I chose to or wanted to. It was essentially thrust upon me. It was an issue that should have been central to the environmental movement. I was a central leader at that time, but it was widely ignored by all the institutions, including the NGOs, who should have been protecting our kids against toxins. It was an orphaned issue, and I had a weakness for orphans. I watched generations of children get sicker and sicker. I had 11 siblings, and I had 7 kids myself. I was conscious of what was happening in their classrooms and to their friends, and I watched these sick kids, these damaged kids. In that generation, almost all of them are damaged. And nobody in power seemed to care or to even notice. For 19 years, I prayed every morning that God would put me in a position to end this calamity. The chronic disease crisis was one of the primary reasons for my running for president, along with ending censorship in the Ukraine war. It's the reason I've made the heart-wrenching decision to suspend my campaign and to support President Trump. This decision is agonizing for me because of the difficulties it causes my wife and my children and my friends. But I have the certainty that this is what I've meant to do. And that certainty gives me internal peace, even in storms. If I'm given the chance to fix the chronic disease crisis and reform our food production, I promise that within 2 years, we will watch chronic disease burden lift dramatically. We will make Americans healthy again. Within 4 years, America will be a healthy country. We will be stronger, more resilient, more optimistic, and happier. I won't fail in doing this. Ultimately, the future, however it happens, is in God's hands and in the hands of the American voters and those of President Trump. If President Trump is elected and honors his word, the vast burden of chronic disease that now demoralizes and bankrupts the country will disappear. This is a spiritual journey for me. I reached my decision through deep prayer, through hard-nosed logic, and I asked myself, what choices must I make to maximize my chances to save America's children and restore national health? I felt that if I refused this opportunity, I would not be able to look myself in the mirror, knowing that I could have saved lives of countless children and reversed this country's chronic disease epidemic. I'm 70 years old. I may have a decade to be effective. I can't imagine that President Harris would allow me or anyone to solve these dire problems. After 8 years of President Harris, any opportunity for me to fix the problem will be out of my reach forever. President Trump has told me that he wants this to be his legacy. I'm choosing to believe that this time he will follow through. His son, his biggest donors, his closest friends, and all support this objective. My joining the Trump campaign will be a difficult sacrifice for my wife and children, but worthwhile if there's even a small chance of saving these kids. Ultimately, the only thing that will save our country and our children is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other. That's why I launched my campaign to unify America. My dad and uncle made such an enduring mark on the character of our nation, not so much because of any particular policies that they promoted, but because they were able to inspire profound love for our country and to fortify our sense of ourselves as a national community held together by ideals. They were able to put their love into the intentions and hearts of ordinary Americans and to unify a national populist movement of Americans, Blacks and whites, Hispanics, urban and rural Americans. They inspired affection and love and high hopes and a culture of kindness that continue to radiate among Americans from their memory. That's the spirit on which I ran my campaign and that I intend to bring into the campaign of President Trump. Instead of vitriol and polarization, I will appeal to the values that unite us, the goals that we could achieve if only we weren't at each other's throats. The most unifying theme for all Americans is that we all love our children. If we all unite around that issue now, we can finally give them the protection, the health, and the future that they deserve. Thank you all very much.
In a passionate speech, I mean, incredible. Lots of bullet points here, folks, that we went through in an
Unity
almost
party?
45-minute speech there. Yeah, the Unity Party. I've got a lot of notes to cover over here, but yeah, Elizabeth, I think that at the very end there, he got very emotional about the issue of chronic disease in children and choosing to believe President Trump will take on the issue and being declined even a meeting with Vice President Harris. What's your reaction?
This is an issue near and dear to my heart. When my husband had his first stroke and then second, third, and more. And then my mother, when she came home because Joseph had a stroke, we found out she had her first case of cancer and then her second. And I immediately started doing a lot of research. Not immediately. It took me, took me a few weeks to finally say, I'm going to sit down and research what's the problem here. And the more I dug in, the more my mind was blown. I could not believe what I was learning, and I won't go into it. That speech, which I did not expect, I thought it was going to be 15 minutes, and it was, 15 and done. I thought it was riveting. I was wondering if you guys were thinking, "Oh, gee, I didn't sign on for this," and I obviously wasn't going to ask you during his speech, but I was riveted. I thought it was deeply moving. I loved when he said, with a sense of victory and not defeat, I am suspending my campaign. With a sense of victory and not defeat, I did not understand fully all the details of what happened with his campaign. I knew a lot of it, but it's even worse when it's laid out. I think he took this moment to lay out when the entire nation or so many people would be paying attention, and to lay it out for them, because you might not get this exact chance again. And so I was thrilled that he did it. Everything he said, I was embracing.
Yes, very well put. And just some highlights. And 16 months ago, he declared his candidacy. So I didn't realize it had been that long, but we've been in this for a long time. He said that the media engineered a surge for Kamala Harris, which based on nothing. He had a great line. Who needs a policy when you have Trump to hate? He spoke about the history. I think he opened up with the history of what the Democrat Party was all about, and he spoke of course his father and his uncle in the 60s and 70s, and how that the Democrats of today have completely changed that. He of course praised his volunteers. There was no surprise there in doing that. And then of course he called out the media for abdicating their responsibility and just becoming a mouthpiece, an organ for the Democrat Party. Brian, what did you think of his take on the history of the Democrat Party, where they are now, and the role of the media?
Well, it goes along with exactly what we were saying before, how there's been this realignment because the Democrat leadership has gone so far off from what they used to be. You look back at the debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in 1960 and see, both of them would be ultra-conservative Republicans today if they were still around. And so, yeah, they've gone a long way off, and the media has been complicit in that. Not only complicit, they've been leading the charge. They've been polling the Democrats as far left as they can. And, like we've been talking about, Kamala Harris doesn't have any policies. She doesn't need any policies. Like RFK said, who needs a policy when you can have Trump to hate? And we've seen a never-ending drumbeat of hatred for Donald Trump for going on 9 years now, from this media that is lying to us and gaslighting us and just completely abandoning any pretext of objectivity in service to this left-wing revolution.
Yeah, and he spoke a lot about, if the system, and we've all said this at times, if the system was clean, he'd have he felt he had a really good shot at winning it. But with the lawfare, with the media, the courts, all of that stuff happening, he just didn't see a clear path, and he couldn't try to convince his donors and supporters otherwise. He didn't want to lead them on, which is why he throws his support behind Donald Trump. And Josh, what do you think of this strategy? He's going to leave his name on states where it kind of really doesn't matter. Everybody kind of knows the stronghold, the red and the blue. But these swing states, he's removing his name from the ballot and joining the Trump campaign.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, most of the time the Electoral College confuses most Americans, and some people may be thinking like, well, does that still mean that Trump can win? Yes, it does. And this is a great strategy. I think it's awesome. I want to know if there's more to come from this speech. I thought it was great. It's kind of a genius move too. Like, everyone looks to him so he gets his message out one last time. Mm-hmm. Unless he's going to have a further career with working with the new administration. His 3 points, fascinating: chronic disease, censorship, and war. Everybody forgets chronic disease, but he made a really strong point for this is dragging the country down and essentially killing our citizens, and just nobody's paying attention to it. And I thought it was all good.
It was. And Brian, you had mentioned during our chat, behind the scenes here, that MSNBC, maybe CNN, pulled away from the speech while he was live. But and then you saw the jump on X go from 1 million to 1.5 million. What did you witness there?
I was watching the tweets scroll throughout the speech, seeing people's reactions. And several people were saying that both CNN and MSNBC started cutting away when RFK started talking about the dirty tricks of the Democrat Party. And, of course, the media, which CNN and MSNBC, sorry about that, are part of that, those dirty tricks. I had the X stream on another screen muted just to see the viewership, and it started off when he first began at about 1.1 million. By the time it was done, it was 1.8 million. So a lot of people tuned in to see this, and I'm sure a lot more are going to watch the replays and clips over the next few days and weeks. What's interesting to me is that he not only said he was supporting Trump, he said he was joining the Trump campaign. That was an interesting way of phrasing it. So I wonder if we're going to see him out there, kind of like Vivek Ramaswamy and J.D. Vance, as kind of a surrogate for Trump out there, maybe in some of these swing states, maybe appealing to independent voters or disaffected Democrats, with this message of really this message of life, trying to fight these chronic diseases that Big Pharma just is happy to facilitate, because it means they continue to get paid, as well as stopping wars. And these are the things that Democrats have found themselves in support of.
Yeah. And Elizabeth, there seems to be a lot there. There does seem to be good. It doesn't get said enough, but there is crossover here with the things that Trump says on the campaign trail about no war, and censorship and the attack of the state on dissident voices. And one has to think that these two forces joining like this, and him relying on JFK to kind of take the lead on the chronic disease and pushing that subject out there, that this is I mean, this is going to change the dynamic on the campaign trail, right?
When they made the announcement that this, I don't know, what was the word that she used, that this is like the biggest thing that ever happened to electoral politics in like the history of the world. And I just thought, really, of course that's still an overstatement, but I didn't expect that. I just expected that he was going to drop out of the race, and that he was going to endorse President Trump, and that there would have been some kind of conversation bringing him on the Trump team. I didn't know what that was going to look like. But to say the words unity party and joining the campaign, and then to go into such great detail, and at the end there, he mentions his President Trump's son, family, supporters, his entire ecosystem, very much in support of this. And he actually even said that President Trump wanted this, whatever this was, I think it was relating to the chronic disease, to be his legacy. Maybe the pronouns, I'm not sure about whose legacy and what this is, but that's how I took it. There's just very interesting language. I'm literally going to be watching this again after we get off while I'm doing some other work, because I want to hear it all again. Everything he said about chronic disease, that is all true. And when he made a promise that when 2 years go by, that Americans will be healthy, more reinvigorated. I'm using my own words, just the impression I got. But that in 4 years, a dramatic change would have taken place in our society. I just thought, wow, this is like when Trump was making these promises in his first before his first term during the race, and I'm thinking, really, you're going to really do all this? And so I like the bold promises. What we saw last night with Kamala Harris was just the art of saying nothing, and I'm excited. Are you guys excited?
It's very exciting. It's very exciting.
I'm excited.
Yes. No,
and I do think it's a shift. I'm sorry. You asked me a question. I didn't even answer it. Not unusual. I'm sorry.
No.
This is like a seismic shift.
Yes.
I don't know where it's going to go, but it's really about principles, not the name of the party. It's about the principles that we are fighting for.
Yes, and that has been said even before we started watching the speech today, that this really does seem to be a battle of ideas and direction forward, more so than just cult of personality and who likes who better and all that stuff. So it's a really good point we made here. So Brian, I want to give you the last word here as we wrap out the day.
Well, I was just thinking of one thing early in the speech. Robert Kennedy mentioned that it was shortly after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump that an intermediary reached out to set up a conversation between them. And remember, this is Robert Kennedy Jr. When he was 14 years old, his father was shot by an assassin on the campaign trail when he was leading in the polls. So even though the circumstances are different, imagine what memories that would bring back and what echoes he's seeing. And then after that, he maybe that somehow subconsciously got him to think about, okay, what is really my purpose here? What legacy do I want to leave? Do I want to run another third-party campaign that takes votes away, that spoils the race? Or do I want to actually make a difference and open up space for the things I care about to be accomplished? And I think he made the right decision.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, Elizabeth is going to go off and rewatch the speech a few times, make some notes. Yeah, and we'll be back here next weekend. So, folks, breaking news we'll always try and cover here on WND Live. So please make sure you're subscribing on Rumble, on X, on YouTube, on Facebook. What else am I forgetting here, Josh?
Elizabeth Farah at X.
There we go.
Now
Yes,
I'm
yes.
live streaming since WorldNet Daily's banned live streaming on X. I'm
Right.
going to do the job for you.
Excellent.
For
Excellent.
us.
Yeah, so please follow Elizabeth there. Where else, Josh?
You can't follow me on censorship, war, or disease. I usually don't.
Doomer.com.
Yeah,
whatever.
but you can always come back here and I'll give you a very sober report, but we'll try to keep it balanced. And if it was just me talking, it'd be depressing. But thanks everybody for watching with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. And of course, Brian Allman over there at Gem State Brian on X. You can follow him there. All right, folks, thank you again. Have a fantastic weekend. Please share the show around, and we'll see you next week. God
Shabbat
bless.
shalom and pray for Israel.
Amen.